It has been 2,500 years, and yet one name is still remembered today as a lasting symbol of power, ambition, and conquest. And that name is Alexander the Great, a legendary conqueror who changed the map of the world during his short life. After taking the throne at the age of 20, within just a few short years, he expanded his reach from Greece to Egypt, Persia, and India. Alexander had firmly taken control. In an era when communication moved slowly, maps were often incomplete, and travel could take months or even years, Alexander built what many consider history's greatest empire by blending Greek philosophy, Persian administration, and long-established Eastern traditions. He created such a powerful combination that the world was left watching in awe. How did Alexander manage to accomplish all of this? Was he genuinely great? Or was he just an ambitious young king who, even after conquering everyone, couldn't conquer himself? Come along as we find out in today's video. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Pabi in Macedonia, the capital of ancient Greece. Alexander's father was Philip II, the king of Macedon, and his mother was Olympias, one of Philip's wives. Since Alexander was a prince, he received all the privileges that naturally come with being the son of a king. Plutarch writes in his book The Life of Alexander that private tutors were arranged for Alexander's education. Private tutors were hired for him, and one of them was Leonidas, who was closely related to Philip. Leonidas was a very strict teacher, and he trained Alexander relentlessly in combat, horseback riding, and military tactics. A few years later, another teacher was appointed, named Lysimachus, who trained Alexander in music and poetry and also taught him how to read and write. When Alexander was only 10 years old, a trader brought a horse to his father, but no one was able to control it. Seeing this, Philip was about to refuse the trader when Alexander stepped forward and said that he could handle the horse. Hearing that, Philip was a little surprised, but he was also somewhat curious and wanted to know whether Alexander truly had the ability to do it. Since Alexander truly did have the ability to do it, Philip gave him his full permission. Then Alexander walked up to the horse. First he spoke to it very softly, then he petted it, carefully climbed onto it, and began riding it in a calm and steady manner. Seeing this, Philip was extremely impressed. He said to Alexander, "My son, you should seek a kingdom that is truly worthy of yourself. Macedonia is far too small for you." After that, he went ahead and bought that horse. And named him Bucephalus. This was the very horse that Alexander rode as he went on to win countless battles. After that, when Alexander was 13 years old, his training shifted to a whole different level when Philip hired Aristotle, who is widely considered the greatest philosopher in history. Aristotle gave Alexander daily lessons at the Temple of the Nymphs, which was located in Myesa. Here, Alexander studied alongside other royal children, many of whom became his close friends and later went on to become his generals. Aristotle gave Alexander lessons in religion, art, logic, and philosophy, and King Philip was so impressed by this training that he had Aristotle's hometown, Stagira, rebuilt, which had been destroyed in a war, and also granted freedom to all the slaves there. Alexander's first real challenge came when he was just 16 years old. King Philip had declared war on the kingdom of Byzantium, and since he was going to personally lead an army into battle, he left Macedonia in Alexander's care and then set out for the campaign. For 16-year-old Alexander, this was a very significant responsibility, and some people thought they could take advantage of the situation. A European tribe known as the Thracian Mede started a rebellion against Macedonia, believing that the kingdom had become weak under the rule of 16-year-old Alexander. They quickly faced the consequences of underestimating him when Alexander sent an army, drove them out of his territories, and then settled additional Greek citizens there, naming the place Alexandropolis. When King Philip returned from the battle and saw how effectively Alexander had managed to deal with this revolt, he was genuinely impressed. After that, he assigned Alexander his very own small army, and he was responsible for dealing with any potential future revolts within the kingdom. For the next 3 years, Alexander accompanied his father on his military campaigns. During these campaigns, they first defeated the kingdoms of Elatea and Amphissa, and then at Cheroneia they confronted the armies of Athens and Thebes. And this is precisely where the Battle of Cheroneia began. Philip decided that he would personally command the right wing of his army, and Alexander would command the left wing, which he led very excellently, and together they won this battle. After that, most of Greece came under Philip's overall control. After achieving notable success in Greece, Philip then turned his attention toward the Persian Empire, and this time he once again left Alexander in charge of overseeing and managing his kingdom, and Alexander carried out this responsibility very well again. When Philip returned, he decided to marry yet again. His new bride-to-be was named Cleopatra Eurydice. This marriage dealt a bit of a blow to Alexander's dream of becoming the next king because she was Macedonian, and Alexander was only half Macedonian because his mother was not from Macedonia. This meant that if Cleopatra had a son, he would become the successor to the throne before Alexander. Plutarch writes in his book that during the wedding, Cleopatra's uncle Attalus raised a glass of wine and wished that Cleopatra would soon have a son, so that Macedonia would someday have a true Macedonian king. When Alexander heard this, he became so furious that he threw his cup straight at Attalus and shouted, "You villain! Then what am I, just a bastard?" Seeing his father remain entirely silent, Alexander felt so deeply hurt that he left together with his mother for Epirus, where his uncle, King Alexander I, was residing. Meanwhile, back in Macedonia, King Philip also had a son with Cleopatra, but he was still quite saddened by Alexander's departure. In fact, he truly did not want to remove Alexander from the position of his successor. Then he sent him a message to persuade him and commanded him to come back, and Alexander, following those instructions, returned to Macedonia. But after that, their old relationship was no longer quite the same. After that, Philip arranged the marriage of his daughter, who was also named Cleopatra, to Alexander's uncle and also his own brother-in-law, the king of Epirus, and before long, the wedding day finally arrived. The wedding ceremony began, and as soon as King Philip entered the theater, one of his own bodyguards suddenly stabbed him, causing him to die right there on the spot. There are several conflicting sources regarding the reason for this assassination. However, according to the historian Diodorus, the bodyguard who carried out the assassination was named Pausanias of Orestes, and apparently Attalus's men had abused him. And he wanted King Philip to punish those people, but that never actually happened. And because he did not receive any justice, he ended up taking this extreme step. After King Philip's death, Alexander was officially declared to be the king of Macedonia. Alexander was deeply shaken by his father's death, but he also knew that if he did not make some very tough decisions, his own life could be in very real danger. After that, Alexander made certain decisions that made people's souls genuinely tremble. According to the historian Diodorus, Alexander first worked together with his mother to have Philip's new wife and her newborn child put to death. At that time, Attalus was in Asia Minor, so Alexander sent official execution orders there to have him killed, and then, one by one, he deliberately and selectively had all his political rivals put to death. After that, as soon as the news spread that a strong and dominant king like Philip was no longer alive and that his 20-year-old son had now become king, revolts began erupting again across the kingdom. For instance, the newly conquered city-states of Athens and Thebes believed that they could become independent once again. Disregarding his own advisors, Alexander personally set out with an army of 3,000 soldiers to put down those revolts. He reached Thebes first and completely destroyed the entire city, and after that, fear of Alexander began to spread throughout the rest of his kingdom. And the revolts gradually began to die down. After that, Alexander also went on to the state of Greece. He was welcomed there without any real opposition, and he firmly established himself as a strong ruler. But Alexander was not going to be fully satisfied with only that. Aristotle's teachings had made him ambitious ever since childhood. And now that he had become king, he felt that he had to rule the entire world. It was 334 BC. Alexander left Greece in the care of his trusted military general Antipater and then set out toward Persia with an army of 40,000 soldiers. Alexander believed that the Persian kingdom was a gift granted to him from God. Alexander and his army encountered resistance for the very first time in Persia. In the Battle of the Granicus River, the river itself became a major obstacle for Alexander's forces. The Persian army was being led by their military commander, Memnon of Rhodes. He positioned his army, which was approximately half the size of Alexander's, along the Granicus River and waited for Alexander's army to arrive. Alexander clearly demonstrated his military brilliance in this battle by using the wedge-shaped assault tactic. He personally led his army into the river and attacked the very center of the Persian army in a straightforward, direct manner. According to some sources, Alexander personally took part in the battle and killed many Persian soldiers by his own hand. One soldier even attacked him with an axe, and he was almost killed, but he survived. Thanks to his superior army, Alexander ultimately won this battle. In this battle, about 4,000 soldiers of the Persian army were killed and Greek casualties were only about 50. After that, the remaining Persian soldiers had to flee from there. Some Persian soldiers were captured, and among them were soldiers who had previously served in the Greek army. Alexander declared them to be traitors and ordered that they all be executed right there on the spot. After that, Alexander successfully captured Sardis, the capital city of the Kingdom of Lydia, and then reached the Ionian coast, where the people warmly welcomed him without any opposition at all. Alexander told the people there that they were now completely free from Persian rule and could live in a truly democratic way. After that, he marched onward and eventually reached Halicarnassus, which was a fortified coastal city. It was also a very important naval base of the Persian kingdom, with massive walls that were extremely difficult to breach. After losing the Battle of the Granicus, Memnon of Rhodes had remained there with his army. Alexander surrounded the fort with his army, and then he constructed siege towers, battering rams, and catapults just outside its walls and began his attack. In response, the Persians launched surprise attacks at night and attempted to destroy Alexander's siege equipment, but they were not especially successful. According to modern historians such as A.B. Bosworth, the siege continued for roughly 2 months. After that, the Persians were no longer able to stop these attacks, and under the orders of Memnon of Rhodes, they set the city on fire and then fled away by sea. Afterward, Alexander captured Halicarnassus and restored Ada of Caria, the city's original queen, from whom it had previously been taken, as queen once again. In return, Ada adopted Alexander, which indirectly meant that Alexander gained control over Halicarnassus. After advancing onward from there, Alexander arrived at Gordium, the capital city of Phrygia, and according to certain Greek legends, some local people guided Alexander to a shrine where something had been tied up with a rope in a very complex manner, forming an especially intricate knot. Then they told Alexander that whoever unties this knot would be the one, will become the ruler of Asia. After hearing this, Alexander drew his sword and cut the rope with a single swing. After that, Alexander marched farther south with his army, where he was about to face an even larger force, Darius III's army. Darius III was the king of the vast Persian Empire. Then a major battle took place between them, known as the Battle of Issus. Even though his army was smaller than his opponents, Alexander's tactical skill and courageous approach led him to victory in this battle, after which Darius had to abandon his entire kingdom and flee from there. After that, Alexander's fearsome reputation spread so widely that the moment he brought his army toward any kingdom, that kingdom would surrender on its own. By 332 BC, Alexander had taken control of Syria and the Levant. After that, Alexander set his sights on Tyre, which was an island city on the Mediterranean coast. With water all around it and its massive walls, it was difficult to conquer. At first, Alexander kept the island under siege for 7 months. Then, showing an example of his brilliance with his army, He built a stone-filled causeway across the water and sent his army directly onto the island. According to the historian Arrian of Nicomedia, after waiting for months, Alexander became so angry that as soon as he entered the island, he massacred 8,000 people. After that, Alexander marched toward Egypt with his army, and all the kingdoms along the route surrendered. However, one kingdom dared not to accept defeat, and that kingdom was Gaza at that time, which was located on a hill. Getting up there and entering the city by climbing was quite difficult, but Alexander had made up his mind that he had to capture Gaza. His army tried 3 times to break into the city, but they were not successful. Then, on the final attempt, they managed to enter the city. During this, many of Alexander's soldiers were killed. Alexander himself also suffered a serious injury to his shoulder. After that, Alexander set out toward Egypt, where people welcomed him, regarding him as their son of God and liberator. They also regarded him as one of their own pharaohs. While he was there, he founded the city of Alexandria, which would later become a major center for learning and training. After leaving Egypt, Alexander set out toward Babylon, the capital of Persia, where King Darius had taken refuge after losing the battle. Alexander still had 47,000 soldiers, but some historians believe that Darius had an army of 1,000 soldiers in Babylon. In 331 BC, the two armies faced each other directly. At Gaugamela, Darius positioned chariots and elephants right on the very front line of his army so that he could completely crush Alexander's army. In response, Alexander moved his troops forward so they could aim more accurately at the chariots. Darius himself was riding in a chariot, and during the battle he fell out of it, then mounted a horse and fled from the battlefield once again. Seeing this, his soldiers also began to run away, and Alexander once again won the battle. After that, Alexander captured additional cities such as Susa and Persepolis and looted everything there. Then he decided to find Darius and kill him so that Darius could not make any further moves against him. However, before that could happen, Darius's close man, Bessus, killed him and took his place. After that, Alexander. While searching for Bessus, Alexander continued advancing steadily through Asia, and during this period he founded several cities in his own name. Eventually, Bessus was betrayed by his own generals, handed over directly to Alexander, and then executed. During this same campaign in 327 BC, Alexander captured Bactria and, in order to build strong alliances in the region, married Roxana, the daughter of a local ruler named Oxyartes. Then Alexander turned his attention toward India. First, he sent delegates and ordered the Indian kings to surrender. Some smaller kingdoms surrendered, and those who refused had to face Alexander's brutal army. Their villages and cities were burned with great brutality. After that, Alexander encountered his most challenging opposition from King Porus of the Punjab region, who was the ruler of the Paurava kingdom, and then the Battle of the Hydaspes took place between the two opposing armies. Arrian of Nicomedia writes in his book Anabasis Alexandri that Alexander ultimately won this battle, after which Porus was captured. However, during the battle, Alexander was so impressed by Porus's military tactics and personal bravery that he offered Porus continued rulership. Then an agreement was made between the two, in which it was formally decided. It was formally decided that Alexander would become the new king of Paurava, but that Porus would continue to rule under him. After this, Alexander had conquered even more territory than any ruler in history, but his ambition still had not diminished, and he wanted to advance further into India with his army. However, his army had become deeply exhausted from fighting battle after battle, so they refused to march forward any longer, which eventually led to revolts breaking out within the army. One of Alexander's generals told him that the soldiers were longing to see their families, their children, and their homes again. Alexander felt genuine sympathy for his soldiers and ultimately decided to return home. However, Alexander was compelled by long-standing habit, and even while returning, he kept capturing smaller villages along the way. After that, when Alexander returned to Persia, people warmly welcomed him by calling him the King of Kings. Alexander greatly liked Persian customs, and he began adopting Persian habits and Persian-style dress, which seemed quite strange to Alexander's generals. While returning from there, Alexander went to the regions he had captured earlier and executed his own generals who were involved in corruption and injustice. In 324 BC, Alexander arrived in the Susa region of Persia, where, to further strengthen relations with Persia, he arranged marriages for his generals and he arranged large-scale weddings with noble women, and he himself married two royal Persian women named Stataira and Parisatis. However, Alexander had three wives. According to some historians, such as Robin Lane Fox and Paul Cartledge, Alexander also had relationships with men, especially with his closest friend Hephaestion. After that, Alexander finally arrived in Babylon and decided to remain there for a few more days. Here in Babylon, Alexander began making concrete plans to conquer Arabia. During this period, he held parties nearly every day and consumed a great deal of alcohol. On the night of June 1st, 323 BC, Alexander drank heavily at a party, returned to his room drunk, and then went to sleep. That night, he suddenly developed a very high fever, and his condition quickly worsened. According to the historian Arrian, over the next 12 days, Alexander's health kept deteriorating. Every possible effort was being made to save him, but no medicine or treatment truly seemed to work, and in the end, Alexander passed away at the very young age of only 32. Some sources also claim that Alexander may have been killed by someone poisoning him. The entire empire was in deep shock at the death of the world's greatest king. People simply could not believe that such a strong and courageous king had passed away at such a young age. Alexander was laid to rest in Alexandria. In the centuries that followed, Alexander's name became closely associated with bravery, and many emperors traveled from distant lands to pay their respects at his tomb. It is said that the Roman Emperor Augustus also came to view his body. Today, the location of Alexander's tomb has become one of the world's mysteries.